I called the police on my noisy neighbor and discovered he's related to me. That sentence sounds like it belongs to a sitcom pitch about karma, but it was a very real Tuesday night that changed the trajectory of my quiet, uneventful life. I'm Emily Park, 32, middle school music teacher, amateur baker, and until recently, the self-appointed noise patrol of Building B. Our apartment complex in downtown Seattle is an upgraded shoebox scenario. Walls thin enough to hear when your neighbor decides to learn the drums or have an emotional crisis during reality TV. When I moved in, the listing promised peaceful urban living. Peaceful lasted exactly 1 month, until apartment 3C was rented by the man who would later be both my nemesis and, unbelievably, my cousin. He moved in quietly, ironic given what followed. Within days, every evening after 9 p.m., erupted into chaos, bass that rattled light fixtures, laughter spilling into the hallway, music from some decade that couldn't decide if it was jazz or construction noise. My first approach was polite communication. I baked lemon bars, carried them next door, and rehearsed my friendly tone. "Hi, I'm Emily from 3B. Just wondering if you might turn things down a bit after 10? None of that happened, because when he opened the door, words evaporated. He was youngish, late 20s maybe, messy hair, and wearing the guilty grin of someone who knows he's loud but finds it endearing. "Hey, sorry," he said over booming trumpet solos. "Getting settled, you know?" I did know. I'd done the moving in symphony myself. So I smiled and handed him the lemon bars. "Welcome. Just maybe lower octave." "Got it," he promised. For 2 glorious nights, silence returned. Then the storm resumed, louder. After a week of this, my patience had evaporated. At 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, after another round of whatever that was supposed to be, vibrating my ceiling fan, I called the non-emergency police line. My voice shook a little. I'm not a confrontational person when it comes to uniforms and sirens. "Hi," I said. "I live in 3B, and my neighbor in 3C is, well, practicing for the apocalypse." The dispatcher promised to send a patrol car. The officers arrived 20 minutes later. I peeked through the peephole as they knocked on his door. The music stopped mid-horn blast. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, an uneasy guilt washed over me. The next morning the hallway was eerily quiet. For 3 days, 4. On the 5th day, guilt mutated into curiosity. I bumped into him, or what I thought was him, in the lobby collecting mail from the old-fashioned boxes. He looked tired but smiled when he saw me. "Hey, you finally got your quiet back," he said lightly. "Cops came, right?" My throat tightened. Yeah, someone must have complained." He laughed, and it wasn't angry, just exasperated. Deserved it, honestly. My uncle dropped off the sound system he used for his bar, and I went a little overboard testing tracks. Didn't realize the bass carried that far. "Your uncle ran a bar?" I asked, eager to drag the spotlight away from my potential betrayal. "Used to, in Tacoma, Korean place called Harbor Lights. Family legend says he lost it in the 90s after a cousin took off with his recipes." He grinned. "We still joke about it." Something in my stomach flipped. Harbor Lights. My father had told that same story, a semi-famous relative in Tacoma who vanished from the family after stealing marinade secrets. The surname, Han, had sounded familiar when I saw it stenciled on his mailbox. But Han is common, and coincidences are cheap. Trying to sound casual, I said, "Your uncle's name?" "Daniel Han," he replied, stuffing circulars into his bag. "Why?" I blinked, certain my face was giving away fireworks of recognition. "That's my mom's brother." He laughed. "No, seriously, what's his name?" "Daniel Han," I repeated, a little weaker. "My mom is Grace Han Park. I haven't seen him since I was 5. It was his turn to stare. "Wait, Grace Han's your mom? She used to babysit me whenever my dad forgot pickup from school. My parents still talk about her bibimbap." We stood there, bags of mail forgotten. The absurdity of the realization swirling around us. My noisy neighbor was family, distant but not distant enough to justify the police call I'd just made on him. He started laughing first, deep, contagious laughter that ricocheted off the lobby walls. "This is insane," he wheezed. "We're cousins?" I covered my face, groaning. The cousin who called the cops, apparently. Over coffee later that afternoon, we pieced together the genealogy. His mother, Mi, was my mother's half-sister. They'd lost contact when the family split between Seattle and Tacoma decades ago. "So technically, you're my cousin once removed or something," he said, stirring his drink. "Any chance this means I can't press charges for the noise complaint?" "Only if you promise never to play music past 10. I shot back. We both laughed, still processing the cosmic joke. As it turned out, his sound experiments had been tracks for a documentary he was scoring. He's a freelance sound engineer. When he wasn't shaking walls, he was actually composing. By the end of the day, my irritation had melted into fascination, but the guilt remained, especially since he hadn't even been mad. He insisted on dropping by with dumplings as a peace offering. "Family feeds family," he said, dramatically banging a pot lid to announce his arrival. That's how I found myself sitting on my sofa with the man I'd tattled on, eating kimchi mandu and laughing at the absurdity of newly discovered bloodlines. The story might have ended as a quirky family anecdote, but 1 week later, when my mother heard from him before I could warn her, the fallout turned from funny to unexpected reckoning. A family reunion decades overdue, full of revelations my mother clearly hadn't prepared me for. That awkward dinner and the secrets it stirred back to life are where the next part of this story begins. When Mom called the following Sunday, she didn't waste time on greetings. "Emily Jin Park," she began, using the full tri-syllable sentence reserved for parental emergencies. "Why did I learn from Daniel's nephew that you reported him to the police?" My heart dropped straight into my coffee mug. "Mom, technically he's my neighbor. I didn't know he was family when I called." She made a strangled noise somewhere between outrage and laughter. "Our family. After 25 years of silence, that's how we reconnect? With law enforcement? Congratulations to me," I muttered, the Pacific Northwest's most efficient matchmaker. After half a minute of maternal sighs, she calmed enough to admit, "His name's Alex, right? He called yesterday. He said you were very polite about it. Sent lemon bars?" "Those were pre-cop lemon bars," I corrected. "He wants to meet. He says we need a Han Park reunion." I nearly spilled what was left of my coffee. Mom had cut ties with her half-sister Mi years before. The feud had been one of those dramatic immigrant family rifts that metastasized over decades. Restaurant recipes, inheritance whispers, and pride. Always pride. Growing up, I only heard the story in fragments. Something about Uncle Daniel's missing notebook of marinades. The end of a business partnership and a vow to let the Han side forget us entirely. So when Mom said reunion, I could only stare. "You really want to see them again?" I asked carefully. "I didn't until yesterday," she admitted. "But Alex sounded kind. He said your call was the best thing that ever happened to our family." That's a wild interpretation of a noise complaint. Her tone softened. Maybe fate needed a ridiculous excuse. Maybe fate just has a sense of humor, I thought. 2 weeks later, I drove my mother to Alex's house for the dinner he'd arranged. A full-scale family revival, complete with dishes labeled in both languages and the smell of soy and sesame wafting down the hall. Inside, his mother, Mi, stood in the kitchen, apron already dusted with flour. When she saw my mother, there was a split second of stillness, then a trembling little smile. "Grace," she said in Korean. "Unni," Mom whispered back. No one dared breathe. Then they both started laughing. High, nervous, unstoppable laughter that spilled into tears. I watched them hug awkwardly amid the clatter of chopsticks, like two women realizing the absurdity of aging separately over a fight no one fully remembered. Dinner became a wild patchwork of apologies and bragging. They debated whose kimchi was superior. Mom's, obviously, traded childhood gossip, and discovered they both started growing succulents in quarantine. Alex and I exchanged unbelieving glances every few minutes, silently communicating, "Are you seeing this?" At one point, Mom reached for her glass of barley tea and looked at me. "If you hadn't called the police," she said, shaking her head. "I promise I'll never weaponize 911 again," I said solemnly. Unmi chuckled. "Maybe we should name a dish after you. Peacekeeping tofu." The atmosphere softened further when Uncle Daniel himself arrived near dessert. Time had shrunk him a little, but he still carried the presence my mother used to describe. Booming laugh, kind eyes, and a chef's posture. When he spotted Mom, he froze. She spoke first. "I think you owe me a notebook," she said. He blinked, then laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. "You still believe that story? Grace, the recipes got soaked in the flood. I left copies with you." "You mean I blamed you all this time for my own lousy filing?" she said, half horrified, half amused. The next hour dissolved into retelling the misunderstanding so many times it became family folklore before dessert arrived. Somewhere amid refills of makgeolli, the talk turned to the next generation. Alex mentioned he was composing the soundtrack for a new Korean-American documentary. When he said he wanted a cello piece for the final scene, all eyes turned to me, the teacher who hadn't touched her instrument in years. "You still play, don't you?" Mom asked. "You and your middle school orchestra could use a collaboration." "You're volunteering me in front of witnesses," I warned. "Family tradition," Daniel said. "We guilt each other into art." By the time we left, the parking lot echoed with laughter, hugs, and leftover containers. Driving home, Mom looked 10 years younger, humming one of Uncle Daniel's melody lines. "I forgot I had siblings," she murmured. "And a nephew. And you apparently have a partner for a cello project." I smiled at the night road ahead. "I'm still the cousin who called the cops, Mom." She laughed. "You're the cousin who made us talk again. We'll promote you from suspect to hero." Over the next month, coffee visits turned into weekly dinners. Alex and I started working on the documentary's closing piece, me building cello lines while he layered gentle percussion underneath. Somewhere between rehearsals, he confessed, "I've always envied people who like quiet. Now I know why. It's hereditary." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The girl who couldn't stand the noise was now deliberately making it with him. Music has a wicked sense of humor. Still, a family that had once disintegrated over decibels and recipes was humming again. And that reconstruction, fragile as it was, led to something beyond unexpected concerts, a discovery tucked inside one of Daniel's old cookbooks that rewrote more than just our family history. But that part, the note folded between grease-stained pages, is where the next chapter begins. A week after that dinner, the family text thread, which had existed for exactly 7 days and was already 87 messages long, lit up again. "Uncle Daniel, found something in the old Harbor Lights ledger. Come by this weekend. Bring music." I thought it was another recipe debate. Instead, it turned out to be the last missing verse of a story that had haunted both sides of the family for 2 decades. Saturday morning, Mom and I drove down to Tacoma with cello in the back seat. Alex met us at Daniel's small apartment above a bakery. The air smelled like coffee, soy sauce, and nostalgia. Daniel greeted us waving a tattered black notebook. "This," he said theatrically, "is the real Harbor Lights ledger. Not lost, just moldy." Mom crossed her arms in mock suspicion. "That better be marinade formulas and not a shopping list." "Both," he said, flipping pages streaked with faint grease circles. Then he stopped at a folded sheet tucked near the back. "But this is why I called. You should see it." It wasn't a recipe. It was a handwritten letter dated 1997, in their father's tidy script. To my stubborn daughters, Grace and Unmi, if you ever open this, it means I failed to make you talk to each other. The only inheritance I can offer is a reminder that family recipes are useless if nobody sits at the same table. Mom covered her mouth. Unmi, reading over our shoulders, blinked back tears. Uncle Daniel cleared his throat, trying and failing not to cry. He knew you drive each other crazy, he said softly. Mom placed the letter flat on the table as if it were glass. He wrote this the year he died, she whispered. All this time, I was the one who walked away thinking he'd pick a side. He was just tired of our noise. The room was gentle quiet, thick but not heavy. Then Alex pushed his laptop forward, open to a recording timeline. I think this letter belongs in the film, he said. It's about how diaspora families lose themselves over pride and volume. The final piece should begin with his words, spoken by both of you. Mom half laughed through tears. I can't act. You don't need to, he said. Just remember him. That evening we recorded in Daniel's kitchen, microphones balanced among sauce jars and coffee cups. My cello line wound below their voices, low and warm like background forgiveness. When we finished, Mom exhaled, smiling at her sister across the table. Maybe all he wanted was to make sure we learned how to listen. Unmi nodded. Loudness runs in the Han bloodline. Listening doesn't, until now. After a quick dinner, inevitably full of competitive compliments about dumplings, Daniel handed Mom the ledger. Keep it. Harbor Lights should belong equally to both of you, he said. Although technically, the recipes are outdated. Well, she answered, slipping the ledger into her bag, then it's time we update them together. Months later, when Alex's film premiered at a local festival, the theater smelled faintly of popcorn and pride. The final scene featured the audio we'd recorded, the sisters reading their father's letter over a montage of family photographs, ending with the words, "Listen louder." The audience applauded, some wiping eyes, some laughing at the subtitle translation of Peacekeeping Tofu. After the credits, Mom squeezed my hand. You realize none of this would have happened if you'd tolerated that music? Or if Alex had worse speakers, I said. She chuckled. Maybe there's value in a little noise. Back home that night, I stood in my once silent apartment. From 3C came the faint hum of bass, measured, respectful, alive. I smiled, grabbed my cello, and answered with a slow line that blended into his rhythm. For the first time, the walls didn't feel thin. They felt connective, like a shared heartbeat instead of a boundary. Bean, my neighbor's golden retriever, who always sneaks into my hallway during jam sessions, sat beside me as though guarding the peace treaty. I'd set out to reclaim quiet, but ended up amplifying an entire family's voice. So if anyone asks about the night I called the police on a noisy neighbor, I tell them it was the loudest mistake and the best music lesson I've ever had. A reminder that sometimes harmony begins with a little bit of honest discord.